Fairly early in public schooling, we are taught the distinction between science and pseudoscience. Perhaps the foremost mark of distinction of science as opposed to pseudoscience is the practice, the habit of seeking facts and building on those facts, the evidence, to reach conclusions. Now, pseudoscience is supposed to do pretty much the opposite. It's supposed to begin from a model, from so-called conclusions, from beliefs, from convictions, and then seek out evidence that corroborates the conviction, so that feeds into it. And so inevitably, pseudoscience misreads the evidence. Now, the distinction between science and pseudoscience, given this criterion, is not at all self-evident. For one thing, modern science is very much in the business of corroborating models. Now, one might argue that the models that so-called scientists come up with are based on evidence. Well, that's not all that simple, because the evidence is construed in a certain way. You say, well, they come up with the models, nevertheless, based on a sense of what the problems are. So we, as scientists, try to explain our situation through our models, and then see if the model fits, right? If it succeeds into accounting for the problems that we have. The evidence. The evidence is a kind of problem for us, right? And if the two coincide, somehow the model matches and responds to our problems, then we say that the model is successful. And then it's tested further, and finally we could say, well, now it rises to the status of a law, perhaps even, right? Well, it turns out, however, that the evidence is very much informed by the model in our perception of it. In other words, we don't have today, especially, a pre-scientific sense of the problems. We have an understanding, a conception, an experience that is mediated by models. We could say that it's mediated by technology, more generally speaking. We have certain habits that somehow condition our perception of things, that somehow inform our views and tell us what counts as evidence and what does not count as evidence, what counts as more important and what counts as less, being less important. So the whole process of selection of evidence and of interpretation, generally speaking, of evidence is very much informed by certain models. Now, there is, in this respect, a whole history of models, scientific models. If we were to go back to the dawn of modern science, and thus of a history of models that build on each other, that modify each other, in order to account for our ever-changing experience, really, of life, what do we find? Well, we find that the first scientific model in the modern world, the first modern scientific model, is in effect what we usually call the scientific method. So it's a method that is supposed to help us assess the evidence. Right? There are certain rules, regulations, there's a strategy to assess evidence. Even a Cartesian, we might say, going back to René Descartes, a Cartesian manner of approaching and selecting evidence. Right. Well, this method is supposed to solve a fundamental problem. What is the problem that the scientific method seeks to solve? It seeks to solve it, and it solves it in a nominal way as a general method, for it allows us to go about, as modern scientists, interpreting, selecting, ordering the evidence, which is to say the contents of our everyday life experience. What is the problem, however, that modern science, the modern scientific method, seeks to solve? Again, nominally, the scientific method does its job. But the scientific method alone, of course, is not enough. We need to move on and establish models that can help us account for our experience in detail, right, as we move on. So something might happen that disrupts an early model. We want to have a concrete model, not just a general method, right? A formalism, right? A sort of a map. We want to have the real thing, the content, the substance. And that's why we need these other models. So what is it that we're trying to solve? We're trying to solve a problem that transcends the content that is addressed by the scientific method. What is that problem? Well, it is reality, it is even a field of experience that is pre-philosophical, pre-scientific. Shall we say, then, that there is human condition that modern science responds to. This human condition is at once politically structured and it has a theological dimension. So we have a political theological problem, really, that modern science is faced with. And the way it deals with it is by framing it. There's a method that helps us frame the political theological problem. And this framing, in effect, is a kind of neutralization of the problem, or of the problematicity of the problem. In other words, the problem becomes safe. It becomes, well, it is tamed, it is framed, and then we can deal with it, as if in a lab. So we can deal with the theological political problem in a special, symbolic, geometrical manner, and the scientific method allows us to do this. It tells us what counts as evidence, what does not count as evidence. It implies knowledge of the limitations of the human mind, of the fundamentally nature of the human condition. So the scientific method is really responding to a political theological situation, and it is doing so by framing it, by neutralizing it in such a way that we can respond to the problem and solve it, potentially, first nominally and then gradually in the concrete, in a mechanical way, without really any reference to the danger that is originally characteristic both of politics and of theology, both of man and of God. The dangerous man and the dangerous God. So the two are neutralized, and they're neutralized in this mechanistic conception of the human situation. So we only consider what is mechanically structured and can have a mechanical solution, replicable mechanically. So there is this mechanical reproduction that is characteristic of scientific endeavors. So the original problem is supposed to be addressed by the machine. First nominally, but that's not enough, clearly. And then eventually, in the concrete, through the establishment of models that shape our experience, that are able to account for our experience, again, in mechanistic terms, so that our experience no longer has, or is no longer tainted by this element of danger. The dangerous man and the dangerous God are gone. So we have a new experience, in fact, a new world, a new empirical world that has been purged of the element of danger, the dangerous man and of the dangerous God. It's a mechanical world. In this mechanical world, we can finally solve the problem. But the solution is not a real solution if you consider things carefully. It is mostly an obscuring, a banishing of the problem, almost an alienation from the problem. So we enter into this world, the mechanical world, in which we don't have that problem. That problem has been eliminated, flushed out, not solved in the respect that we do not understand that problem. Right? So that modern science tends more and more toward a solution that is devoid of understanding. So we do not seek understanding, we seek to solve the problem in the sense of silencing it, the sense of rendering it irrelevant. We don't need to bother with it. So there's danger, but it's outside. We are safe here within the machine. Now, if we consider the broader, as it were, a broader scene, we can see that the dynamics that modern science responds to are those of the Middle Ages, really, and of the ancient world. So throughout the pre-modern world, what counts the most is and this is in social, political, theological terms, is an alliance between master and slave. We can put it in these terms. There is a bond of trust. So trust, living relationships are the basis of all pursuits of knowledge. Basis for our experience, for our clearly understanding. So the medievals speak of fides quaerens intellectum, which is to say that there's trust in the possibility of understanding based on trust that there is something to understand in nature, pre-scientifically speaking. Something that is alive. The relationship between the Father and the Son is essential to the constitution of our experience. Now, with the modern world, we have this attempt to replace the bond, even the feudal bond, between master and slave, between father and son, with the aid of, merchants. Now, what is peculiar about merchants is that they function pretty much in a mechanical way, and their language is somewhat, we could say in academic terms, nominalistic. Merchants, by necessity of their trade, are liars. They're always trying to gain profit and portray a certain product as better than what it is. They try to convince us that we need something that we actually don't, to buy something that we don't really necessarily either need or want. So the merchant is obviously not there to help us. He's there to help the trade and profit. Now, merchants at the dawn of the modern world are going to be traveling around, and they will rely more and more, this thanks to this innovation, this modern innovation, conceptual innovation, this project, which is the core of the modern world, rely more and more on an empty token of exchange. which is money. But in linguistic terms, it is words that are emptied out of roots. They're uprooted from the problem of faith, for example. So what we have here is an availability to cheat, to, well, fool people. So even, in fact, to the outright detriment of their well-being. So why is the merchant important for the development of the modern world? Well, it's important because the principle of marketing is going to replace the faith, the fides, even the feudal fides, the feudal faith, this bond between one man and another. And in so-called economics, we have a replacement of barter with, in fact, a trade mediated by money, empty tokens. And so even of marketing, rhetorical marketing, so empty words. Now, what this fundamentally suggests is that the notion that society is based on being, there's something fundamental, being, which is the verb of God, is replaced with the notion that in order to succeed in life, in order to achieve your ends, you are to rely on two, shall we say, strategies. The first is pretending to be good. Not to be good, but to pretend to be good. And the other one is to make use of evil. So this is a Machiavellian strategy overall. On the one hand, life is about pretending to be good. This is what the merchant does. And on the other hand, on occasion, you don't want to emphasize it, but you're willing to do this, being evil. Because if you're not willing, ready at every moment to be evil, and to cover it up, pretending to be good, then you cannot be a successful merchant. So, especially where there's a lot of competition, and when we're speaking about a mercantile society. And a mercantile society is not based on a principle of faith, but on a mechanistic principle of trade. A mercenary principle, therefore, because it's not based on a principle that transcends the trade. Everything is marketable, even the principles, especially the principles are marketable. And today we could say that religion is marketable, God is marketable, the human being is merchandise. So, what do we have at the dawn of the modern world? We have a replacement of man and God, the bond between father and son, with the dominion of mercantile logic. So gradually this becomes more and more evident. The merchant becomes the king. So the ruler of the world is a merchant, a mercenary. And public discourse is going to unfold in these terms. On the one hand, people, merchants, pretending to be good, they're selling you a product. Public discourse becomes propaganda. On the other hand, it's going to be fostering evil. So you need to pretend to be good while you're fostering evil in reality. So this is a situation that we come up with, and this is a situation which constitutes the context of the development of modern science. For modern science, it turns out, is developing in the direction of corroborating, in fact, of substantiating the early modern scientific method, which simply gives you a nominal solution to the theological political problems. The nominal solution is just a sketch out, a blueprint. But we need to tackle the real man, the real God, the dangerous ones, not simply by framing them, but by entering within and being sure that they will not attack the system. They will not question the system. They will not show themselves again, come back, and disturb the order of the machine. The machine must not be disturbed by the reemergence, the comeback of the dangerous man and the dangerous God. So modern science is really going to develop in technological terms in the respect that it will foster this rise of a technological world, so an experience shaped by technology, where technology is the logic of the machine, and it is going to manifest itself in terms of objective machines. So in the technological world, we have to get rid of the dangerous man and the dangerous God, and we want to shut all social receptors to the comeback of the restoration of the dangerous man and the dangerous God. And so it is evident, really, that technology is going to have a decisively dehumanizing function. And the so-called scientific models that we build are going to work hand in hand with the development of tools that wind up constituting the world that we live in. So we're going to be living in a world of technological tools, and these are going to eventually fuse in with our own being, or we are going to fuse into them. We're going to become like these tools because we have to be transformed. We have to transform ourselves through the models into some kind of tool, some machine that is devoid of that element of danger, which is proper to the original man and the original God. So our humanity and our divinity is to be discarded. We have to be purged of that and become cyborgs integrated in the technological society. So when we give computers to children to work on, these computers are not, of course, innocent or value-free tools. No, they're very much integral to this process of dehumanization. They're fostering the dehumanization of children. So you'd say, well, this is science. This is real science. This is not pseudoscience because it begins from the evidence. Well, we have begun from a certain conception of the evidence. This conception blinded us from the mystery of the human condition. We have then a conception that is mechanistic, that frames everything in a mechanical way and places checkpoints, right? Telling us what counts and what does not count, how we should go about then fleshing out this method and corroborating it. So it's all about feeding into this conception, the mechanistic conception. So all of the evidence is going to feed, and we're going to look for it in a certain way, and we're going to look for that particular evidence, or bit of evidence that seems to, well, that lends itself to serve the method, or the building of a model, which ultimately is going to be the world itself as a model that is supposed to account for evidence. But what this accountability really is all about is keeping it safe. So you can keep our experience safe from disturbances, from the element of danger, from questions. So all questions about the system, and thus also about technology, are going to be shunned, ostracized, eliminated, obscured, And so we're going to be building up a model world that is devoid of these questions, devoid of danger. Everything's going to be mechanical. And people are going to be mechanically raised, you know, so dehumanized. Um, so this is all about a war against humanity and against divinity. So is this science as opposed to pseudoscience? Well, I think the question lingers. The question is still open. It pretty much looks like um, here we are begging the question. That here we are starting from a certain conception and trying to fit the world into a certain model. And we're not really looking at the phenomena as they are or trying to see them as they are or being open in faith to what they really are all about. We're rather framing things to cater to certain prejudices, certain conceptions, certain expectation, and ultimately the dream of a brave new world.